What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I would like to welcome you all to another edition of Wayne's Perspective, where we operate in discipline, decency, integrity, and respect. All right, so finally, after some self-inflicted delays, or should I say self-imposed delays, we're finally going to get to the first wrestling-related post on my channel. As I've told you guys in my introduction, and if you haven't done so, please go and check that out because it gives you a verbal snapshot regarding what my channel is going to be about. Um, this is going to be the first video with me revisiting the entire Monday Night War. I already know that that's going to be quite the undertaking for me because we're talking about a history that goes on for a few years, and it's a lot of content, a lot of material, a lot of history, and everything like that. And of course, this is coming from a longtime fan perspective. I was actively watching both shows at this point, and based on what everyone has said, including myself, it was basically the most exciting time to be a wrestling fan. Going back and forth between Raw and Nitro and things like that. It was just a real awesome time, and most longtime fans gonna always remember that. And when the war was over, that was pretty much it for a lot of people. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So this particular video is gonna highlight the Nitro debut from September 4th, 1995. So before we get into the actual show, I just want to say to all of my current subscribers and those who have been checking out my prior content, I want to thank you very much. Future subscribers, I want to thank you very much as well. So without being said, let's go ahead and get to it. And again, this is the first wrestling related post on the channel, so this should be a good one. So without further delay, let's get to it. So before I start with the actual Nitro episode itself, I just want to talk a bit about my wrestling fandom for those who are new to my channel. So, basically, I started watching wrestling at the age of 5. When me and my mom used to live with my grandma, I do remember vividly I would watch, or at least attempt to watch, WWF programming on Saturday and Sunday mornings. And I would always remember being in the room and watching it. And then my grandma, bless her heart, love my grandma. As soon as she came in and saw wrestling on the TV, she would hurry up and make me change it. I still to this day don't know why. Maybe she knew what the deal was regarding wrestling. Maybe she knew, the inner workings of it or whatever. I don't know, but she refused to let me watch it. Even though my mom was there, my grandma will always step in, turn that mess. So then when me and my mom finally moved and and she got her own place, that's when I was free to watch it. So I watched it with no issues or anything like that. Um, Also, I was always a WWF fan at this point. Now, every time I would ask my mom to order a pay per view, she will always refuse, until she actually ordered one for me the first time. So, should I mention that now, or should I save that for when we get further into this Monday Night War? I think I'll take the chance and save it for when we get further in the war. I'll save it for then. So, needless to say, I was a fan ever since, and my mom, she didn't have any problems with me watching it. It was just entertaining. Now, well, entertainment. Now, going back to my mom for a bit, she was a fan back in the 80s as well, but mainly the NWA. She was a fan of Ric Flair. She used to always compliment his robes and talk about how pretty his hair used to be. I think she was a fan of Dusty Rhodes too, probably because of them promos. Rest in peace to Dusty Rhodes. Um, and she also liked the Road Warriors. Rest in peace to Animal and Hawk. She used to always talk about how tough they were, and that's why she really liked them. But after a while, she stopped watching, and without even having to ask her why she stopped watching, I think I know why, and it was because she did not like the dusty finishes. Now, longtime fans, y'all know what a dusty finish is. If you don't know what a dusty finish is, research it, and you'll get the full context of it. And even though she didn't know what a dusty finish was, she just was fed up with the finishes and the screwy nature of everything. So once she was done, she was done. And she never really looked at a full show again. The only time she was really exposed to any content was if I turned the TV on and showed her something or told her about what was going on, or somebody that she worked with at the time relayed some information to her to get to me, so that's how it was. So my mom, she just never was a fan. And now when I think about it, I do remember her saying that she stopped watching, and this is a direct quote. She stopped watching because it was getting so phony. That's what she was saying. And again, that goes back to the dusty finish. So I can only imagine that that's what she was talking about. So interesting story there. So I just wanted to share that. So getting back to WCW now, I started watching WCW probably at some point in 1992. I cannot recall what I was first exposed to, but it may have been the 1992 Halloween Havoc pay-per-view. I remember going with my aunt somewhere in Hopewell, Virginia at this point. We went to somebody's house, to visit, and they just happened to be watching the show. Now, my aunt, she probably doesn't remember that, but I do. So that was probably one of my first real exposures to the WCW product on pay-per-view at the time. And after that, going from 93 to 94 to 95, I would watch it here and there. Longtime fans will remember WCW Saturday night on TBS at 6:05 p.m. That was, considered must-watch TV at the time. So I remember watching a couple of shows and stuff like that, but I never really stuck around for it because I was always a WWF boy, so that was that. But then that all changed when Nitro came on the air. Now, looking back at that, I was 11 years old at the time when the debut episode started. So I don't recall how I heard about it. I want to say I probably found out about it because even at this point, I knew that Raw wasn't on. So I probably was just flipping channels. And then next thing I know, when I made it to TNT, I saw this wrestling show and I was like, okay, even though it was WCW, I was like, Monday Nitro, what's going on here? So that's how I started watching Nitro. And then, the rest is history, as they say. Now, speaking of history, I am about to go into a little bit of that. Now, check this out, y'all. I have some articles in front of me right now, along with a burgundy type notebook or binder by my side. Now, these documents, which came courtesy of WrestleLine.com, and it was an online onslaught report covering the Monday Night War at this point in maybe this was dated September 6, 2000. I printed these articles when I was a junior in high school, y'all, and I made it a point to keep all these documents. I still have them, and I got the dates and everything. I printed these out on February 23rd, 2001, and I think that was a Thursday or a Friday. Don't quote me on that. I think that was a Thursday or Friday, and I kept these documents. I kept the binder and all of that. So I still have some stuff in my possession from my junior year in high school, y'all, along with CDs that I owned back in the day. That I still have. So I got a lot of historical things on my end. So, and you can never go wrong with having stuff from that time period and just keeping it for old time's sake. So what I'm about to do now is I'm about to read verbatim the history going into the Monday Night War and basically what led up to it. So I'm going to read this verbatim. I was going to scan it, but I just decided not to because it was, I just didn't feel like doing it. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. Hopefully you guys will stick around for this. Okay. All right. So here we go. While the head-to-head battle started in September 1995, when WCW under the command of Eric Bischoff launched WCW Monday Nitro to go head-to-head with the WWF's established flagship program, WWF Monday Night Raw, the real story of the war for Monday Night goes back even further to January 1993. The Monday Night slot captured Bischoff's attention because of the remarkable success the WWF had after converting their Monday Night program from a studio-based highlights and recap show to a live in-arena program each week. For nearly a decade, the WWF's 2-hour primetime wrestling, I remember that show, was a primetime staple for the USA Network and featured desk-bound hosts, most notably the Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan duo, rest in peace to them, introducing matches and segments, most of which had previously aired on other WWF shows. PTW experimented with other formats, including a live audience and in-studio guests, which never really worked as well as it did for the old Tuesday Night Titans Hour, which was pulled from USA in the mid 80s, and a roundtable of announcers or wrestlers introducing and debating various matches and current events. And a quick word on Tuesday Night Titans. I remember hearing about the show, but to this day, I never actually watched a full episode of it. I was a WWF boy through and through, but I never watched it. I was never interested in it. And when it came to programming that was on the USA Network before Raw came, I mainly watched All American Wrestling and Primetime Wrestling. Longtime fans, y'all remember that. And of course, watch the syndicated Superstars of Wrestling and Wrestling Challenge. So, that takes me back right there. Continuing on. But there was no denying that no matter what format was tried, the PTW audience was shrinking. So, in an effort to bolster the wrestling audience for USA Network, the WWF totally rethought their concept for Monday Night Wrestling. They understood a couple of key things. First, cable was now available in an overwhelming majority of U.S. homes, so there was no longer any reason to keep the WWF cable programming secondary to syndicated programming. Both now reached a substantial audience. And second, with wrestling in a mainstream free fall, it'd be more important than ever to cater to the hardcore wrestling fans. This group of fans may be generally loyal to the business, but were also quite jaded and unlikely to watch weekly programming if they already knew what was going to happen. With those two realizations, the WWF decided to create a new hour of event programming each week and place it in the old Monday time slot. The show was dubbed Monday Night Raw, which I did watch from its debut all the way up until, the war and continuing on from there. So, of course, instead of rehashes of the syndicated programs, the cable show would be a place where new matches and new storylines took place. And to prevent hardcore jaded fans from bailing out on the show, Raw was live from New York City's Manhattan Center every 2 or 3 weeks to maintain this air of unpredictability. The show started out red hot and grew back a significant Monday Night Wrestling audience with such memorable moments as Shawn X-Pac Waltman's debut as a Tuck Love jobber, who in only his third match in the WWF scored a huge upset win over Razor Ramon. And rest in peace to Razor Ramon, aka Scott Hall. And at this point, X-Pac went by 1-2-3 Kid. Raw also entertained hardcore fans with longer, more competitive matches, including an incredible pair of Shawn Michaels versus Marty Jannetty IC title matches that both garnered Match of the Year votes for 1993. But after the hot start, Raw cooled off. It became impractical to continue to pull the crew off the road in whatever region they were in to do tapings in NYC. With that decision to no longer tape Raw exclusively at the Manhattan Center, the show lost its unique, intimate feel. Almost simultaneously, instead of being live every 2 or 3 weeks, Raw was aired live only once a month because of a WWF money-saving decision to tape all of its TV for a given month in 1 3-day spurt. All this was coupled with the losses of top stars like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage, who would accept offers to jump to WCW, and we'll hear more about them shortly. Raw was vulnerable, and Eric Bischoff, who had already taken big chances on hiring high-priced performers away from the WWF, decided to take one more chance. He asked Turner executives about going head-to-head with the WWF on Monday nights. He competed with and beaten the WWF in battles for top name stars. Now, with the blessing of the Turner broadcasting juggernaut, Bischoff would battle with the WWF for an audience Titan had been attracting every Monday night for years. Fans, experts, and even some wrestlers thought Bischoff's plan was doomed to fail. The WWF had created the audience. They'd been on Monday nights longer, and their name was still synonymous with pro wrestling in the mainstream audience's eyes. The most common opinion as WCW got closer and closer to launching Nitro was that Turner executives were basically giving Bischoff just enough rope to hang himself. They let him spend huge amounts of money to sign Hogan and Savage with little improvement in the company's performance. So now they let him have a 3-month test run on Monday nights. And if his show tanked, everybody expected Bischoff to be out of a job. And that's real interesting right there. All right, so I'm going to go to the next document. And then I'm also going to take a look and read a couple of passages from the Death of WCW book as well. Just some additional context. So Eric Bischoff was granted only a 90-day test run for his Monday Nitro experiment. Turner executives were as wary of his chances for success as anyone else. However, Bischoff was quietly positioning his show to be a headlines grabbing success rather than an also ran. The first piece of the puzzle was scheduling Nitro's debut for September 4th, 1995, when Monday Night Raw was preempted for U.S. Open tennis. The wrestling audience would be all his for that first night. Bischoff also began stocking his cabinet with talented, well-regarded workers who would appeal to the hardcore audience fostered by the WWF on Monday nights. Thanks to a working agreement with New Japan Pro Wrestling, it was easy for Bischoff to arrange to sign Chris Benoit, rest in peace, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, rest in peace to Eddie Guerrero, and Sabu, New Japan Pro Wrestling regulars who had been working for ECW domestically. This helped to bolster the WCW roster, which had been filled up by friends of Hogan and others who were proven ratings deaf. All right, and I think I'm gonna stop it right there. I might come back to it after the show. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull out um, the WCW, the Death of WCW book, the anniversary edition. All right, give me a second here while I flip through these pages. Okay. Shout out to R.D. Reynolds and Brian Alvarez for this great book. All right, so let's see. So we starting on page 58, part 1, the birth. Let's see. All right. Let's see, skipping ahead a little bit. Okay, so Bischoff and Turner had yet another meeting, and this time Ted had a question. Why, he wondered, was WCW Saturday Night not beating Monday Night Raw? The shows were very close in the ratings at the time. If they had Hogan, Savage, and all the other top stars, well, okay. Bischoff said that Raw aired on Monday nights, a better television night than Saturdays, which was funny since wrestling had a long and storied history of excellent viewership on Saturdays. That's a good point. And had the benefit of sometimes going live. Turner, who was already pissed off at McMahon since Vince had been sending him letters for the past year telling him his promotion was an embarrassment to him and he should shut it down, immediately told the supervisor to give Eric 1 hour of live programming every Monday night on TNT. That's big. In other words, WCW would be competing directly against the WWF's flagship show, Monday Night Raw. Bischoff was elated. He had just been given the go-ahead to fight Vince McMahon mano a mano, and now he had to deliver the goods. At the end of 3 years, he said in a press conference a few weeks before the Nitro debut, "I'll be standing alone." Okay. Within the industry, most thought Bischoff was insane to try to run head-to-head with Monday Night Raw, which was, despite WWF's financial difficulties, the #1 pro wrestling show at the time. But Bischoff believed something that few others did. WCW could beat McMahon by changing wrestling forever, which is pretty much exactly what happened. Oh, let me back up. Which is pretty much exactly what WCW Monday Nitro did when it debuted on Turner Network television the night of September 4th, 1995, a week in which Raw was not so coincidentally preempted. All right, so I'm gonna stop it right there. I'm gonna come back to that one as well after I finish talking about the show. And one other point that I want to mention, I have another book right here with me. This one is courtesy of Scott Keith. Most wrestling fans, you know who Scott Keith is, the Blog of Doom. Shout out to him. I've been a fan of his for almost 25 years. And pretty much, I go on the site from time to time, but most of the content that I've consumed from him over the years, I treat it as gospel, wrestling gospel. So in his book, I have all his books except one, by the way. In his book, Tonight in This Very Ring, a fan's history of professional wrestling, he made a comment. He basically said that Monday Night Raw had become such a pathetic shell of its former self that the WWF was now almost begging for a challenge to its throne. It came, in a word, Nitro. And that's what brings us to the debut episode. But before we get there, I just want to make some things clear first. Let me share my screen right quick. All right. Y'all see this right here? Okay, now This also comes from a Scott Keith book. This is from his first book, The Buzz on Professional Wrestling. I remember buying that book back in 2001. I want to say that was for my 17th birthday, I think. But I still have this book, just like the Tonight in This Very Ring book. I still have those. So what you see on this screen is match star ratings, and as it said right here, it was invented by manager Jim Cornette. Shout out to him, and Noam Dooley. Shout out to him. I'm not sure if Noam Dooley is still alive or not, but I know Jim Cornette is. So it was invented by them and has since been taken by the internet community and modified for their needs. Here's a rough guide for you. Now, Scott Keith to this day still use these ratings. So basically, when I talk wrestling, I'm going to use these same ratings, but with some minor updates on my end. So, and like he says in this book, it's all subjective. It all depends on your taste. One man's match of the year candidate could be another man's dud. And he said something that stuck with me to this day. He said, in the end, your own entertainment is the important thing. So going forward, whenever I talk about wrestling, specifically during this whole Monday Night War revisit, when you see match ratings like these, this is exactly where I get them from. You know, even with a few updates. And when I say a few updates, like let's say for example, there's a match that's almost perfect, 4 stars and 4 stars and a half. You can always do 4 stars and 3/4, 4 stars and 1/4, or something like that. It just depends. But like I said, it's all subjective, but it makes things, exciting, So going forward, when I talk wrestling, you know, think of this right here, because that's exactly where it is. And also, what I'm going to do during these particular revisits of the Monday Night War, um, I'm not going to do like your standard recap of the matches because, quite frankly, you can get those recaps any and everywhere on the internet, and that includes Scott Keith's blog. You can go on there right now and research the debut Monday night episode, the Monday Nitro episode. You can get this review along with other reviews, basically a play-by-play of the match. So here on my channel, I'm not going to do a play-by-play of the match. So basically, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to talk about the matches, but briefly. I'm just going to hit on, notable happenings during the show, the best matches of the night, the best overall show, the ratings, and other things like that. So you're not going to get a full recap of the show, if that makes sense. Because, like I said, you can get a play-by-play review all across the internet. It's available right at your fingertips. And also that's just to save me some time as well. So now, if you all want me to do that, which I would be surprised if you want me to, let me know, and we can have a discussion. But in the meantime, this is how I'm going to proceed whenever I talk wrestling on the channel. Okay. So um so with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go right to the debut episode of Monday Nitro. And look at that picture right there. That opening video was always dope. A real good way to start the show and pretty much let the WWF know that they meant business. So, but that opening video was always dope. They could have updated after a while, but they just kept that same video all the way up until a time period, which hopefully we're going to get to. So I just wanted to make that clear. So, like I said, today we have the debut episode of Monday Nitro, September 4th, 1995, hailing from the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota, hosted by Eric Bischoff, Bobby Heenan, and Steve Mongo McMichael. Now, at the time, the addition of Steve Mongo McMichael was kind of interesting because, as longtime fans may know and remember, one of the last times we saw him was in the WWF, where he, was part of the Lawrence Taylor versus Bam Bam Bigelow main event from WrestleMania 11. I saw that on pay-per-view when it aired, so brings back some memories. And plus, let me say one thing quick, and I'm going to touch on this more when we get to the next part of the war, when the actual war does begin, when Raw and Nitro go head to head for the first time. A lot of people still to this day would say 1995 was one of the worst years in wrestling. I wouldn't say that. I have fond memories of 1995, mainly because I was still actively watching at that point. So yeah, I'm gonna have a different view than others. And plus, I was 11 at the time, so there's some nostalgia there, and that's part of my childhood too. So so I just wanted to throw it in there. But yeah, so getting back to the show itself, like I said, it emanated from the Mall of America in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So the opening match, and again, this was a smart move by Bischoff. Put two talented workers in the ring for the opening match, and this will basically ensure that the crowd and the audience in the Mall of America would be entertained, and those watching at home would be in for something special. And that would be the case with the opener, Brian Pillman versus Jushin Thunder Liger. Now, rest in peace to Brian Pillman. Now, this match, like I said, it was the opener. Pillman reversed the back suplex attempt by Liger for the win at 6 minutes and 55 seconds. I gave it 2 stars and a half. Basically above average, nothing special. Now, they weren't strangers to each other, and of course, if you was watching back then, or even if you may have checked it out in later years, they had a classic opening match at Super Brawl 2 in 1992. And if you haven't seen that, I recommend that you check that out. It's some great stuff. Now, Scott Keith also said that they had a match, I think, in the Omni in Atlanta, Georgia, that was captured by somebody, and apparently what they saw was 5 stars. Now, to this day, I don't think that's ever hit the internet. I may check for it, but in the meantime, this match was a good way to start the show. But they were constrained by time, because give them guys, 15 minutes or 20 minutes, they would have put on a classic, just like they did at Super Brawl 2. So again, good opening match, good way to start the show. And then, this match is when they start the whole where the big boys play. And trust me, man, throughout this war, at least going into 1996, we're going to hit it a lot. Where the big boys play, where the big boys play. We got it. All right. So continuing on. All right. So after a Hogan interview at Pastamania or whatever, we get to the U.S. title match, the defending champion Sting against Ric Flair. Now, again, longtime fans, y'all know about the rivalry of Ric Flair and Sting. These guys knew each other well. They had some battles back in the day, but the one that always stands out to me is that 45-minute drawing at the first Clash of the Champions, pretty much the match that made Sting a star. That was some great stuff. And again, if you haven't seen that match before, I strongly recommend you go back and check that out. If you want to see a star-making performance by two individuals, specifically Sting, who was wrestling Flair, who was already a legend at that point, that's how you do it. So that's pretty much, I would say, probably their best match. I mean, they've had many other matches afterwards. I'm not going to go into them all right now. But that match from the inaugural Clash of the Champions is great classic stuff. Definitely recommend that you check that out. And speaking of classic stuff, we get to Luger returning. Now at the time I do remember seeing this, and I was shocked because this guy was on WWF TV not too long before this. So he walked out before the match began, and it shocked everybody. And Eric Bischoff, even though as I'm going to get to later when I close this, even though Eric Bischoff knew about this, obviously, his reaction when the camera hit Luger, I mean, it's just nothing short of amazing. I mean, you really could believe that Eric Bischoff had no idea why Lex Luger just wandered down the aisle. And Eric Bischoff was like, oh, what the hell is he doing here? Get the camera off of him. I mean, man, you could just listen to him and tell that he was caught off guard, so that was the first quote unquote holy shit moment, alluding to one of those articles that I read. That was the first moment where everybody had to sit up and take notice when that happened. Because, like I said, the guy was just on WWF TV about a week or two prior to that, but like I said, I'm going to touch on that more in detail when I finish reviewing the show. But with this particular match, again, it's nothing that we hadn't seen before regarding Ric Flair and Sting. They were constrained by time. They only went 8 minutes and 43 seconds. I may be giving the match, I may be overrated a little bit, but I gave it 2 stars and a half. Basically what happened here is that Double A, Arn Anderson, he came out to ringside at about 5 minutes in, and for the first time ever, he and Flair was going to face each other one-on-one for the first time ever on pay-per-view at Fall Brawl, and I might check that out, just for the sake of this, just for the sake of these revisit. Now, I've watched that match once, and I think I watched some other matches from the show, but I don't think I've ever like actually sat down and looked at it, in one setting. And by the way, y'all, all of this material, my wrestling material, my collection, in this case, my WWF stuff and my WCW stuff, I have my own personal collection, across a few external hard drives, ensuring that I keep this stuff for years and years. I don't need to go on the Peacock for this or anything like that. I have the actual material, the way that it's supposed to be, and all that. So I just wanted to throw it out there. So continuing on here, the match basically ended when Arn Anderson just came into the ring. He didn't touch nobody. The referee just called for the bell. So it basically was a no contest. And after that, him and Ric Flair, they brawled briefly at the end, and not too long after that, Scott Nolan, he arrived on the scene and got into a confrontation with Mongo McMichael, kind of a random thing. And then Macho Man Randy Savage, he came out, but they broke it up. So I have more to say about that in a bit. So then after that, we got a Sabu video. Now, remember what I said about the New Japan Pro Wrestling agreement that Bischoff had? That Sabu video was interesting because most longtime fans would know Sabu is basically best known for his ECW stuff. Now, ECW was a thing at this point, probably about 2 years into their run. Now, I didn't start watching ECW at all until maybe like 2000. So, so I didn't know about them until later years. But having Sabu in WCW at this point, considering what his history was with ECW, that was a big deal, So we're gonna touch on that probably when we get to the next show. All right. Then after that, we get a backstage promo, or I should say a backstage vignette by VK Wall Street. Now, long time fans would remember VK Wall Street from his IRS gimmick in the WWF, and I think he also went by Mike Rotundo in the latter days of the NWA. But he was, coming from the WWF as well, and he threw a little shot at the WWF in that interview by basically saying the new generation is the future generation, and the new generation is something that the WWF was pushing and hyping up heavily, way back when, mainly in 1994. They really backed away from it in 95, but the new generation is the future generation. Okay, we got it. All right. So after Bischoff talked about an upcoming Saturday night episode, he did that after the Sabu video. My bad. All right. So then we get to the main event, which was a WCW title match between the champion Hulk Hogan and Big Bubba Rogers, who is best known basically for Big Boss Man, and rest in peace to Ray Traylor. Even during the match, Bobby the Brain Heenan said he used to be a former prison guard. Obviously, a throwback to that Big Boss Man character from the WWF without actually saying it, Also during this match, which was a standard match, I mean, just think back to any Hogan Big Boss Man match from the WWF days, and this is what we got, And it was also confirmed during this match that Savage versus Norton would take place at the next week Nitro, September 11th in Miami, Florida. So nothing more to say here about this match. Hogan wins at 7 minutes and 12 seconds with a big boot, 3 fists, and a leg drop. Y'all know what that is. A star and a half for this one. Nothing more to say about it. So the post match is when things got real interesting. The Dungeon of Doom came out. Hogan pretty much fended them off without breaking much of a sweat. And then Lex Luger came in and helped him. From there, we got a verbal confrontation from them. Sting and Savage came down to try to keep the peace. And also doing this, there was some big Luger chants. You couldn't miss it, So he had the crowd, and pretty much, it sounded like they were smart fans too, based on that chant. So then from there, we got the closing interview. Luger confirmed that he was back. He notably said he was tired of playing with kids, which was basically a shot at the WWF. And he made it clear to Hogan that he was coming for his title. So that's why he was back. So after a few words back and forth, Hogan offered to put the title on the line against Luger at the 9/11 Nitro, and they shook on it. And from there, that's how the show ended. So, another point that I wanted to make, going back to that confrontation between um, Norton and Mongo McMichael, you can tell that Eric Bischoff was like really trying to give the show like an unpredictable feel, because the show was going to be live every week, whereas Raw at this point was not live every week. And trust me, we're going to cover that. But he really gave the vibe that anything could happen at any time, and that was one of the benefits of being live. Um, so with that being said, in my opinion, it was a memorable show. It definitely is a historic show, and basically the way that you want to do a debut, which is confirmed by that 2.9 rating. Now that was considered a big deal at the time, and again, he had the wrestling audience to himself that night to show what WCW was made of. So how would things turn out the next week for the first actual week of the war? We're gonna get to that in the next video, when not the, when the next video that's coming up, when I continue on with the Monday Night War revisit. So like I said, it was a good show, fast paced. What you see is what you got. Eric Bischoff was serious, and I mean, like I said, if you wanted the blueprint on how to do a debut episode for 1 hour, you can't go wrong with a episode like this. You know, so, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and go to a couple of other details, courtesy of the online onslaught report article that I was talking about. So, let's see. So, additional details. So, um, it wasn't the fortuitous, unopposed debut or the stacking of the talent roster that made Nitro's launch so noteworthy and successful. Bischoff's masterstroke was the signing of Lex Luger away from the WWF. He literally stole Lex right out from under Titan's proverbial nose. Luger had been in the process of renegotiating his WWF deal and had verbally agreed to continue with Titan. With that in mind, the WWF taped several weeks of key programming with Luger inserted back into a key angle with Davey Boy Smith. On September 2nd and 3rd, WWF weekend programming heavily hyped that angle, which was to set up the already taped events for September 11th Raw, which will be covered on the next session, the next video, I should say. Also on the weekend of the 2nd and 3rd, Luger wrestled as scheduled on at least one WWF house show. That is amazing, man. I mean, amazing. And like I said, the unopposed Nitro debut with a 2.9 without an established fan base. WCW pulled a rating as strong as anything the WWF had been pulling with the entrenched Raw. So I'm going to return to that one when we get to the September 11th episode. And then lastly, I'm going back to the Death of WCW book. So, all right. So what happened here was, okay, continuing here. Let's see where we start. Okay. All right. Okay, so let me start back here. Okay. The years old formula of wrestling shows consisting primarily of squash matches flew right out the window. In its place were big name versus big name showdowns, something reserved for pay per views in the past. Shocking happenings such as Lex Luger suddenly defecting from the WWF began occurring on an almost weekly basis. And trust me, we're going to talk about that. Fans soon learned that if you miss Nitro, by God, you could miss a lot, and it became the show to watch on Monday nights. Luger jumped to Luger, Luger jumped the WWF ship for WCW Monday Nitro's first episode, although it had been known by those within wrestling that he negotiated with WCW a few weeks earlier. The belief was that he could not come to terms with the company, only offering him a $1,000 per shot guarantee. Now that is quite low, but we're going to touch on that when I get to the September 11th episode, talking about the first week of the actual first week of the war, because the WWF was in serious financial trouble at this point in '95. Still, one would have thought that Vince McMahon would have either attempted to sign him to a new deal or refused to book him in a prominent position on his TV if he did not have a contract. And now when I think about it, going back to Luger's promo at the end of this episode, you could tell that there was some passion in his voice, because I mean, Luger had at one point he was going to be pushed as WWF champion, but for some reason they kept delaying it, because if you recall, he faced Yokozuna at SummerSlam 93, and that should have been the crowning moment for him. But Luger won by countout, and people still remember him celebrating at the end as if he won the belt, which he didn't. So they thought their bright idea was to postpone his win all the way until WrestleMania 10. But as I remember at the time, because I was actively watching, the fans, they liked Luger, but Bret Hart was the guy. So, it was either stubbornly go with Lex Luger even months after he should have initially won the belt, or go with Bret Hart. And thankfully, they chose Bret Hart. And basically, since that time, since that loss to Yokozuna at SummerSlam, and really choking again at WrestleMania 10, that was pretty much it for Lex Luger as a main eventer. And he just basically was, he played the mid-card role in 94. Then in 95, he was part of a tag team with the British Bulldog. Rest in peace to David Boy Smith. Then after a while, he was just basically doing things, but nothing really catching on. So, I could assume that, he wanted a fresh environment, so to speak, which is one reason why he went to WCW. And plus the schedule would have been better and the money was going to be better. So why would he not take it? So that's my thought on it. So, I just wanted to share that, coming from a wrestling fan's perspective. So continuing on with the death of WCW book. But McMahon did neither, and Luger made a deal with WCW. Okay, so let me back up a bit. Okay, so still, one would have thought that Vince McMahon would have either attempted to sign him to a new deal or refused to book him in a prominent position on his TV if he did not have a contract. But McMahon did neither, and Luger made a deal with WCW. They kept the deal a secret and hid Luger backstage during the first Nitro, so that when he walked out in the middle of the Hulk Hogan versus Big Bubba Rogers main event, wrestlers within both companies were stunned. Okay, I'm not sure why he mentioned it like that, because he actually came out at the beginning of the Sting Flair episode, the Sting Flair match. But okay, Luger, it should be noted, was not brought in by Eric Bischoff, but rather his best friend. Sting brokered the deal. We were having a casual conversation, and he asked me how much time I had left on my contract. I said, I do not have one. And he said, what are you talking about? I gave my 90-day notice back in December of the prior year, 1994. I told him I was basically week to week or month to month right now. He said, you've got to be kidding me. So he contacted Eric, and Eric Bischoff at the time wasn't a real big Lex Luger fan. Yeah, Eric Bischoff made that clear. I thought he was an arrogant ass, Bischoff noted. But I guess he felt I had enough of a name that maybe I could have some momentum for Monday Nitro. I had a conversation with Eric, who decided to go ahead and reel me in. Unfortunately, he had a stipulation that no one could know except for he and I and Sting. And I had a problem with that because I was raised to professionally give at least a 2-week notice. But Eric really wanted this to be a surprise. I literally finished up in WWF on Sunday night at a house show in a tag match against Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. And the following night, I flew home to Atlanta, got right on a plane, and flew to Minneapolis that afternoon. They hid me in a hotel. They then brought me to the building with a towel on my head. About an hour before I was going to go out, they brought me out to the position to go on TV from a side door. And no one knew I was going on until the moment I was standing at the go position. And then I was watching Hogan in the ring. It was a pretty wild turn of events over 2 weeks, especially those last few days. Wow, that's interesting. I'm not sure why they're not mentioning the fact that he walked out. He walked down the aisle before the Sting and Flair match got started. But I digress. All right. So with all that being said, y'all, so we are in, we got the Nitro debut in. So that brings us to the end of this episode. So let me know what you guys think. If you watched the Nitro episode, the debut that night, what did you think? Did you stick around? Did you take off a week or so and then come back? Did you not like what you see and you just kept with the WWF, or you just stopped watching wrestling altogether? Let me know what you think. Let me know what your thoughts of this episode is, and also the episode of Nitro. also what WCW was at this point in 95, as well as the WWF. Just let me know your thoughts, on that, and we can go from there. So with all that being said, family, if you like what you heard and you're ready to become part of Team Discipline, go ahead and hit that like button and drop some comments if you're feeling the content. And last but not least, hit that subscribe button along with the bell so you're notified when I drop new videos. And until next time, my people, take care of yourselves and remember, the power of the mind is valuable.